Colleagues, we'll start the meeting now. We have quorum. Thank you very much. Welcome to the 18th meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. This is a virtual meeting during the COVID-19 emergency where City Hall is open to the public with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the City website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committees, committee meetings, and information on request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489 extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact sppc@london.ca. Colleagues, if we need to take a break at 6:30, we will do so. I'm advised by the clerks that's highly likely. So, acknowledging that, I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest, please. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to item 4.1 of the 18th meeting of SPPC, any budgetary item regarding the Middlesex London Health Unit, as I'm an employee of that organization, and any item pertaining to funding for the early on programs, as my spouse is an employee of an organization dependent on that funding. So
noted, thank you. Any other disclosures? Thank you very much. Colleagues, I bring your attention to 2.1, the Master Accommodation Plan Update and Procurement Process, with the added item and email from C. Butler. I'll ask if there's a wish to move this item. Councillor Hillier, you're moving, seconded by? Councillor Hopkins, thank you very much. Any discussion? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to this, perhaps through you to staff, my concern that jumps out at me at this is that we are changing fairly significantly our planned course of action in response to COVID and the change in work patterns. My concern is that the changes in those work patterns may be temporary, and we could very well return back to what were pre-COVID operations in terms of the patterns and workplaces, recognizing, of course, the original master accommodation plan was looking for opportunities to do alternate work arrangements and work from home arrangements to be able to consolidate space wherever possible and maximize those opportunities. Is there a concern that say in a couple of years' time or so, that we might find ourselves without having advanced this work sufficiently to be able to find that space should those work patterns necessitate some more on-site work than what seems to be anticipated in this report?
Let's ask Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. So at the October 27th meeting, there was a request that Civic Administration look at alternative work strategies and start to look at how that would impact our long-term impacts on space requirements for the master accommodation plan. So taking that direction, staff had already intended that we would be looking at that. Obviously, COVID has now temporarily impacted that, but we will be looking at how we can do that on a long-term basis and come back with recommendations. And that will certainly come forward to council first before anything is implemented for council's blessing. And then subject to that process and what that would look like, then we would have a square footage that would then be able to go forward as part of our procurement process. So that step has to be completed first. It will come forward to council and it will look at the long term. So certainly COVID has had a short-term impact on how we do business, but the request that we've had from council is to look at how that could factor into the long term, and that's what staff will be following through with.
Councillor Turner.
Through your worship, thank you, Ms. Barbone. I can appreciate the direction from council. I think that's my concern, is that that council's direction may not be appropriate, or it may be. But my concern is that we end up having ourselves sold a little short in advance when we'd made a fair amount of progress and work towards the master accommodation plan. This obviously changes things quite a bit for us, but I raised the point just as a point of a large point of caution, because I think for us to presume what the workforce and workplace looks like at the end of this might be a little premature, and that for us to make the assumption that we are going to go back towards, or that we would remain in any form of this, might be the outcome, but it might not be. So if there's preparatory work that we should be doing and that we would need, we could find ourselves a year or two behind if we find ourselves limited in the action that we take here. So that's the only reason I raise it. I do have concerns. I have concerns with the council direction on this. I understand what the intent of the council direction was, but I just want to raise that note of caution. Thanks. Thank
you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to focus, first of all, on the financial aspects of what we're doing and what's going to happen here. It's my understanding that during the last budget cycle, we took $13 million out of a reserve fund and allocated it towards these actions we were going to take towards new space. And now we're suggesting that money go back in there. So am I correct to say that, and I want to make sure people understand this, that us doing this, is it going to have some kind of financial benefit to taxpayers in terms of the operating budget? And by that I mean, are we going to have to put less in that reserve fund so that we're not going to have to fill it up again? Is there any operational benefit to putting that money back in to the reserve fund that it was in?
Ms. Barbone?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So from an operational impact, putting the money back into the reserve fund simply removes the allocation of those funds to be used for consulting dollars. It would go back into the reserve fund until the process is completed with an RFP, until we know how much money is going to be required specifically through the completion of the entire MAP process. That money would still remain within the facilities reserve fund, given the infrastructure gap that has been identified. It is certainly going to be required in one form or another. But the intent of moving this forward is that as we identify a public procurement process and start to move to consolidate space, that would translate into savings over the long term in terms of how we would look at mitigating and creating more efficiencies on the use of existing space, as mitigating the costs of what we have to do for our life cycle renewal in terms of the existing building, as well as trying to realize long-term efficiencies in a more consolidated space that would be energy savings and through a reduced footprint overall. So the intent overall is that this will translate into tax savings for the taxpayer, but that will not be immediate by automatically transferring these funds and basically not directing them specifically for this purpose. It will simply go back to the reserve fund. So that savings will not be immediate at this time.
Councillor Squire.
So my second part is, when that money goes back into that fund, how would it be earmarked for the purpose that you've been talking about? In other words, why couldn't it be used, if council desired, for some other facilities update? In other words, couldn't we say, well, you know, we get this city hall thing is on the front burner, but we want to allocate this money that's properly in this reserve fund for another facility matter? Is there anything to stop us from doing that?
Ms. Barbone.
Through the chair, the money in the city facilities renewal fund is specifically for all of our city facilities. So all of our life cycle maintenance for all of our facilities is done, and this reserve fund is set aside to fund a number of our capital projects. So the balance is something that we monitor and is used as we see the life cycle maintenance needs through our capital budget and through the budgeting process that is approved on an annual basis.
Councillor Squire.
Yeah, just comments then briefly. I have to say that I'm with Councillor Turner. I'm having a hard time seeing how the priorities of council, whether I agree with them or not, have changed very much at all. And in fact, I went back and looked at the reasons that we were looking at changing facilities. One of them was the workforce may work at home no more. It had to do with the aging infrastructure and all kinds of other things that were going into these decisions. And I think this report got a lot of attention as if we were changing direction or something like that, or council had changed its mind into terms of what it was going to do. And then all of a sudden, the whole private-public partnership thing sort of bubbled up. And I read that throughout the report, that there are all these opportunities for private-public partnership. So I just want to say that I really have mixed feelings about this report, whether I'll support it or not, because I found it to be somewhat contrary to what I thought we were actually going to be doing.
Thank you. I don't know, Ms. Barbone, if you'd wish to comment on that? No,
So
but I'm going to give her the opportunity because this is an important issue, Councillor Squire.
So thank you through the chair. Essentially, council's direction hasn't changed on this, and this is looking at the opportunity. The intent that was brought through the multi-year budget was to look at city staff initiating the process directly and doing the work through consulting and starting to do the design and look at opportunities to mitigate all of the lease space to a consolidated space. So that direction hasn't changed. We're looking at a different way to do that. Instead of having consultants, we're looking to the market and through an opportunity that would look at either the existing space in the location that is already owned by the city, or it could be somewhere else in the city, but that would certainly be determined through the RFP process and through council's direction in the future.
So Councillor Squire, I'll give you an opportunity. Is there anything else you'd like to add? All right, thank you very much. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you very much. A couple concerns and a question. Regarding page 4, the procurement process for a new city hall and the only 2 options on here. I think we need to be very careful we don't end up with a white elephant as there are only 2 options on page 4. The next 10 years are going to be very transformative as to the way London provides services, and building a new city hall before we understand how and where the work will be done is very premature. There are buildings downtown more than large enough to accommodate our needs. And would it be easier to add or remove spaces needed in one of these buildings as we modernize the way we provide these city services? Wouldn't it be prudent to consider the space already available to lease or buy? COVID has already vacated hundreds of thousands of square feet of office space. We could be leading by example by filling some of that space. My question to staff through the chair is, were any city hall options considered using the existing space available in downtown London since the COVID crisis began? And if not, could they?
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you through the chair. So the City of London currently leases approximately $3 million of lease space, in most of it in the downtown core. So realistically, we can continue to look at leasing space and continuing to spread people out throughout the core. But unfortunately, when you do that, there is a higher cost in your premises leases over a period of time because the spaces are more inefficient in terms of the delivery, and having where you have economies of scale in terms of having a certain number of people in one space, you have double the washrooms, double the lunchrooms, etc. So certainly that is not something that we would identify as having the greatest benefit for the City of London's taxpayers in terms of reducing costs. If council wishes to look at empty space in the core and looking at other spaces, that is certainly something that the RFP process would bring forward, those opportunities to look at any existing space in the core based on the proposals that might come forward. So that option of looking at a building that would be city owned or city provided absolutely would be an option that could be brought forward through the RFP process. So it simply opens the competitive process to see what things are out there that council could then consider.
Councillor Hillier.
Thank you. I wasn't really considering the lease option. I was considering the large buildings downtown that we could be looking at buying and repurposing because the structures are sound. Thank you.
Thank you. In the same spirit as Councillor Squire's final comment, I will, because you brought up that point, to invite if Ms. Barbone wants to add final comment there.
Through your chair, certainly at this point in time, we do not have direction to go look and purchase alternative buildings, because the intent was that we've been directed to look at alternative work strategies first to determine how much square footage we need. And then we would be looking to a procurement process after that, based on the square footage needs and the way business would then be consolidated to provide the best customer service impact to the citizens of the City of London. So we are intending to do this in a sequential process to put this out. None of those options are precluded through the procurement process, and it would leave it to the market to put forward proposals that we could consider that would meet the needs, that would minimize the impacts on the tax base overall.
Councillor Hillier, anything else then? Thank you very much. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I guess I have a few comments about this one too, and some reservations. I think I'll maybe ask you to split out number B and maybe divide that into two as well. There's a couple things there. I think I may vote against because I don't see the need to make this decision right now. And one of the principles of Agile is that you don't make decisions long before they're needed. I prefer to wait until that report is back and then decide how we're going to proceed after that. I don't want to have to move reconsideration because what we see in the report tells us that we might want to move in a different direction. So some of the things that we might consider are this present COVID arrangement. So our plan a year or so ago was to get hundreds of people in the same place. But these days it's better if it's dozens of people. And so maybe there's an opportunity for us to purchase some heritage buildings around the city and work from those. Now I realize that that isn't the consolidation savings, but there might be some other benefits for that, especially since we can actually take a hold of the heritage challenges that we have. And I think the consolidation, other than money, isn't that needed anymore, because right now we're meeting in disparate places, and frankly, I visit my office at City Hall so infrequently I could rent it out as a storage unit. So I see us being able to do meetings from different places. And so I think looking at some other options might be better. And we may decide that we want to build something as well. So I don't see a need to put that $13 million back. If for some reason it was needed, I'm sure the administration could come to us and say, please release this now. But I prefer to wait for that and see what happens. And the same thing with the with this procurement process. I don't see a need for us to commit to that now. I actually have some concerns about the procurement process now, since we had a bit of a challenge with the parking strategy. So that I see here on page 5, it says that the procurement of goods and services policy, and it speaks of, and then it says at the end of one sentence, in order for staff to recommend a preferred option to council. So I certainly don't want to get a preferred option and then have it be suggested that if we don't like it, we'd be interfering with the procurement policy to change that. So I'll be coming with the corporate services with some potential changes to that policy, or at the very least a review. I have some concerns about how that hinders council potentially in making decisions and guiding things. I also don't like the way it allows staff to be the gatekeepers of information. But so I'm concerned about that. And I think those concerns could be completely allayed by voting down B, or voting down both parts of B, one being it being noted that a competitive procurement process will take place. I just as soon see that plan, and when it's complete, then I'll be happy to vote in one of those, for one of those directions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. I know Councillor Lehman has also got his hand up there too, Mr. Chair. But thank you for acknowledging me. And with this recommendation, I'm generally supportive. I understand the intent of the direction that we gave staff back in October, which was to give us an update. It's kind of created maybe a premature conversation right now, which I'm not that comfortable with getting into. I am looking forward to staff's recommendations coming back to us as well. To me, it's like, what has changed? Not too much. So moving forward, I am a little concerned though, as we are in unsettled times at the moment, and if there is any flexibility in our timelines for the RFP. So through you, Mr. Chair, is that still available to us as we move forward, supporting this recommendation and then looking at the RFP process, but really uncertain is there flexibility in how we move forward?
Ms. Barbone.
Through your worship, absolutely. There's complete flexibility, and this is whatever the will of council is to impact the timelines or make decisions at any later date is not precluded by having any, going forward with this or not going forward with this. It's still up to council, and through budget deliberations and other reports that we will be bringing forward after we've completed the update of the master accommodation plan based on the direction of council at this point. Everything will come back, so it will be up to council to determine how to guide us and how you'd like to move forward at that time.
Councillor Hopkins, thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. I think Councillor Hopkins touched on what my thoughts were as to most of the voices I've heard so far. Underlying this is, I think we all we don't think that we're at the point yet where we can define what the new workplace is going to be. I think we can all agree that it's not going to be what it was for decades and decades. Already in the short time span since the spring, we've seen companies, wholesale have people work from home, thinking there would be great amounts of money being saved, and employees welcoming that to save their commute and the flexibility. And since then, we seem to shift where people realize it's a challenge to work from home and they don't have the resources with childcare or the physical space, et cetera, and missing the social interaction. Companies are raising concerns about productivity, et cetera. So I don't think we're done yet in seeing how the new office will morph. And so I was happy to hear staff's comment there about flexibility as we go down the road. Because I would hate to see us lock into something that, a long-term commitment, when in a year or two, we might have some sort of different organization that we didn't envision even now. I know a lot of companies have made major changes with their corporate spaces. Buildings have been halted, et cetera. But as long as we're fortunate, I guess, that we didn't go down that road 2 years ago. Now, having said that, I know we've kicked this down the road, and we were up against it as far as space is concerned, with many leases and people working in a very inefficient manner around town. So I guess my question to staff is, given the new current situation, has that urgency been reduced as far as we need to act quickly to address our spacing needs?
Ms. Barbone.
So thank you through the chair. So I believe there's kind of two ways to answer that. So one is the life cycle maintenance of the City Hall campus itself and some of the work that has been put off for quite some time pending work on the master accommodation plan. So certainly we can go a little slower, but there are impacts to consider in terms of some of the properties that are on the campus, naming Centennial Hall and certainly the large building that leases from us next door. So there is, that's one thing to consider. The other opportunities are certainly the leases that are lease space and when those leases come due and whether we would continue to renew those leases and what those future things are. So certainly nothing that is imminent. We have some time to look at what unfolds. And in the meantime, we need to do the work to look at alternative work strategies and what that looks like, given that a lot of the staff are currently operating using, remote work capabilities that we never envisioned would ever happen this quickly. So there is clearly some opportunities that we can take advantage of and to look at things that we might not have known how they would work that we've been able to, say, pilot throughout this process. So there's lots of learnings and there are many other municipalities throughout this point that are struggling with the very same things. Some have already made decisions to go permanently to remote work and to lessen their lease space. Others are still looking at the options. So I think we've got some time to do the work, see how this unfolds. And I think there's certainly benefit to look at alternative ways to work and how that would bring benefit to the taxpayers in the future. That would be worthy to bring forward to council to have them review and give us some direction on how to proceed.
Thank you.
Councillor Lehman, you're good?
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm not going to repeat everything that folks have said. A lot of good points have been made by my colleagues. I will just briefly say I shared Councillor Hillier's concern about only two options and whether or not there might be a repurpose option out there somewhere too. Glad to hear there's some flexibility around that. I also share the concern about committing to a procurement process right now before we've actually seen the map come back. So those are my concerns. But I too don't have a crystal ball and don't know what the future of the workplace is going to look like. So I am a little concerned that we might be getting the cart a bit ahead of the horse on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I actually do have a crystal ball in my office, but it doesn't tell me much, I must say. Deputy Mayor, could you take the chair for a moment, please?
I'd be happy to, and I'm just looking at my list and I have the mayor. Thanks
very much. I'm prepared to support the recommendation of staff. Councillor Van Holst has indicated he'd like it split, and we will do that accordingly, A and B. But I will say the three things that I probably heard most through Ms. Barbone's comments were flexibility, considering alternate work strategies and options. And as a result of those things, ultimately, council is still going to determine its fate as it relates to this. So I'm prepared to support the recommendation of staff to ask them to proceed on this basis, and I wanted to add my voice to that. Back to you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I'll turn the chair over to you, and I have myself just on the speaker's list.
Well, on my list, I happen to have two people. I have Councillor Van Holst, and I have you, Deputy Mayor.
You want me to go first?
Well, thank you.
Councillor Van Holst, yes, please.
Has the Deputy Mayor had a chance to speak yet?
Not as yet.
Okay, well then, please, I believe that he should be first.
Deputy Mayor, then why don't you proceed, please?
Okay. I think it makes a lot of sense to update the municipal accommodation plan. I am concerned, but maybe for different reasons than some of my colleagues. One is that although we may get more certainty about what our requirements are, having done the update, costs tend to go up over time. And so it may be the situation here, it's a bit different. Potentially costs could be going down over time. But it could be the case that we need, say, 10% less space. And then whatever we end up purchasing or building in the future or renovating is 20% more. because we've taken more time to build it. And there is a point at which a delay is a bad strategy. And eventually we're going to have to make a decision on this one. You will see in the report that the oldest report that's on this file is from 2011. And this has been a process that's been underway for quite some time. I think we are quite fortunate that we were at the point in the process we were when the pandemic hit, and had not just, for example, just committed to doing something that may or may not be the right thing. I think the situation we're going to be in 2021 is that we're going to have to make a pretty significant decision with still a fair amount of uncertainty about what is the right thing to do. And that's going to be a difficult thing. And that's why I think the update to the municipal accommodation plan is important. So I think it's a relatively small expenditure in the grand scheme of all the accommodation costs of the city workforce over the long term. I think it makes sense to get an update. And I don't think that the problems we had with the parking enforcement RFP were related to the procurement policy or staff's involvement in the procurement. I think it was a difficult process because of the discussions we had at council. And I think setting out the criteria for a procurement is something that we can do. You'll see that in this report, there are criteria outlined for a future procurement process. And we should be thinking very carefully about those criteria before we start the procurement process. So we have time before that's really settled. I think staff have done a good job of laying that out in front of us in the report. And if there's something that we think is important that should be used in evaluating proposals between now and when the RFQ process also actually starts, would be a good time to insert that into the criteria. Then we can have a fair procurement process that gets us a great result in the end. So, I think we've covered a lot of the issues here. There's obviously a big decision, but I think these specific things that are in front of us are the right way to proceed right now. Let's update the plan and talk again about it once we've seen what that update looks like.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. So again, I would like not just this to be split into A and B, but split B as well into the portion where we're releasing the funds back, and also where we're the note where we're moving with a competitive procurement process. I'm not sure I want to make that decision now. Councillor Morgan has said in the past that sometimes I have come forward with a plan that had too many steps, and he just wanted to look at do the first step. And of course, I don't think that staff is trying to flatter me by doing the same thing. However, I don't see that we need to make these decisions now. So I prefer to vote against those two pieces, and that I think has no impact on staff's work moving forward. We'll get that report back, and then I think we'll be doing things in a nice order, and one that I'm comfortable with, and don't feel like, as it has been said, put the cart before the horse. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I appreciate the discussion on this. I am supportive of the motion as it stands, but I want to ask our treasurer a couple of questions about the points of exit on kind of the ramp that is established through the process. So the master accommodation plan would be updated, and then council would have to approve that update. So my understanding is that would be a decision point that we could either agree or disagree with the content of the update. I also want to ask if despite the it being noted clause, which is not a direction, but in it being noted, would we still have to take a council step in the authorization and the release of an RFQAL/RFP process? So if the treasurer could answer that the points of council decision-making in the steps as you're outlined in the report.
Ms. Barbon.
Thank you, through the chair. So the first step would be coming back with the update of the master accommodation plan, and that would specifically lay out how the work would be done to have achieved the alternate work strategies in conjunction to how that would translate into the potential need for space. So the two, in terms of space requirements, are very tightly linked in terms of how we will be doing business. And if there is alternative work strategies employed that would include remote work at various locations, there's different forms that can to look at in terms of, hoteling and different things all impact the spaces. So when that's complete, that would be the first decision point that we would bring that back to council to have confirmation that that is the appropriate steps. Once the space needs are determined, then based on that, then we would have the steps laid out for the RFP would then, as Councillor Helmer had actually had spoken earlier, all of that criteria, all of those things in terms of what is it that we would be looking for would have to be laid out upfront and approved by council so that when we go to RFP, the staff know exactly what they're looking for. So that would be the secondary step. And then once all of that is determined, then we would go to competitive procurement. So I would also note is that the $13 million is not required if we go out for a public procurement. So if there is any chance that that a public procurement's not going to be supported, then I would suggest the $13 million would still be left into the budget as approved, because we might then need that and we would have to go through another budget process to even earmark those funds yet again to be able to do that. So I just, in terms of flexibility, we had put that there, noting that we're going for a public procurement process down the road, then we wouldn't need the consulting dollars earmarked to do the work internally.
Councillor Morgan.
Okay, thank you for that. So what I appreciate here is that there are still a number of council decisions on this. At any point, we could change gears. And to be honest, the concerns are well justified about how things will evolve over the next 6 months. And that's why I think this being a 6 to 8 month process of updating the master accommodation plan will allow us to, as we go, see how things evolve, see how other organizations are responding. There are some that are being very aggressive and very fast in the way that they adjust their space allocations. There are others that are going slow. I think that this approach is in the middle, where we have time to take advantage of, the early changers, for lack of a better term, without having made a final decision. So I will fully respect that. I'm not going to presume that I know exactly what the master accommodation plan will say after this, but I'm comfortable with the exit points that council would have if it doesn't look like something that we want to do. So I'm comfortable with supporting the motion as it's crafted by our staff.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to share some of or agree with a lot of the comments that have been made. I think this is a prudent approach. I think this is a good report that staff have brought to us, and it's not the first time that that this has come before council. So it's not like this is, as Councillor or Deputy Mayor Helmer pointed out, the earliest report on here showing his background is 2011. So we have been talking about this for quite some time, and staff have taken a very careful, calculated approach through all of these years. I want to comment on the idea that we are adjusting for a reality of COVID being a long-term reality in our lives. It's definitely going to be with us for the medium term at the least, but I don't believe that the approach that's being described by staff is to operate in a continuous COVID environment and therefore have remote work as the norm. I think whenever there's a crisis, it's necessary and prudent to seek the opportunities that arise out of that crisis. So what staff have done and what we have all done is figured out a way to operate in this current environment. And what happens when you work through a crisis is you see the opportunities that come up. And so I know another organization whose board I sit on, and I won't name it, before the pandemic invested in technology in a way that would allow for remote work. And so therefore it reduced the need to lease office space. So the needs were reduced, and that our organization was able to respond in real time to the pandemic. They didn't have to go backwards and invest in technology that they needed to work remotely. So that organization was proactive, and I think what we need to do is follow the staff recommendation here. I think they're making some very good suggestions. I do share Deputy Mayor Helmer's concern about too long of a delay. I think those concerns regarding construction costs and procurement costs, et cetera, are very real, and we have to keep those in mind. But I think seeing how we can work remotely, seeing how we can work more efficiently, and not just council. We are a very small number of the people that occupy City Hall on a daily basis. There are hundreds of employees that call City Hall their main workspace, and those are the accommodation needs that we need to address.
Thank you. Councillor Salim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, staff, for the report. And thanks to my colleagues for their input as well. It's been helpful. I mean, I see this as something I support. I think to me, it's a promising opportunity. The reality is yes, COVID has accelerated things, but I think this is really a realistic way of where things were heading in our futures. And I think COVID has provided an opportunity for us to kind of see how things have worked. I think obviously, there's some challenges with it, whether how, managers manage their employees and things like that. But I think as time progresses, things will start to become the norm and things will be able to move forward. I know when the City of Toronto a couple of weeks ago, they had their workplace modernization plan, and their I think it's called Modern TO as well. And they I guess in the plan, they hope to consolidate 14,900 office employees from 55 city-owned or leased locations to some 15 locations. And so obviously that's a significant impact on, the space they're taking up in the city. When we look at the thousands of employees that we have, the benefit that has, whether it's the environmental impact of people having to drive into work, the garage space that we have downstairs. You just look at the garage space down in City Hall. It's empty these days, but in the past, it's always full because we have so many people that we need to be here, but a lot of times they need to make their way down here. I'm not saying necessarily the accommodation plan that we're looking at now will result in everyone strictly working remote, whether that looks like some sort of hybrid or whatever it may be. I think it's something that people want. People really do want a work-life balance. And when you look at the recent release from the City of Toronto, they surveyed their employees, and 95% of the respondents were in support of remote work to some degree, and only 5% wanted to have a 5-day work week at the office. So, and I think when you look at the City of Toronto and their work demographics, it was a very wide-ranging workforce with different demographics, young and old and in between. And I think that says that this is not something that's just a generational thing, but I think people have started to get into the groove of things and found their way. And I think this is an opportunity for us potentially to find some savings and to reduce our footprint. And I think it's prudent for us to head in this direction. We're not marrying ourselves to anything specifically here tonight, I would say. I think this gives staff, the kind of a green light to continue doing what they're doing and come back with the reports. So I encourage my colleagues to support this, and I'll turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just really quickly, the one thing I would also like to highlight is perhaps the health and safety implications that may change associated with moving people and having them work predominantly at home. Health and safety is mentioned in the report, I think more in reference to people actually working at the workplace and the exposure risks that might be associated with COVID. But I would anticipate that to probably over time in the future, we might see some changes to legislation associated with work from home in terms of worker protections through WSIB and such those things. So I think we just need to be live to those. When I take a look at the list of things that might be key areas that would require an update in the plan, that's not explicitly mentioned. It talks about looking at reviewing all alternate work strategies, which includes working from home. I think in that, the health and safety components of work from home need to be contemplated, because there might be some material costs associated with that, whether that's through ergonomics and the equipment that might be needed at home or otherwise.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on the list, but what we do have is a request for A and then B to be split. The clerks in their wisdom have split B, so we will have an A, B, and C, but I'll let the clerk just clarify that as we vote on this item. Clerk, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, what I've prepared for the committee's consideration is Part A. Part B ends with the B released back to the City Facilities Renewal Reserve Fund, and a new Part C that reads, "It be noted that the Civic Administration will proceed with a competitive procurement process after the update of the Master Accommodation Plan is complete and reviewed by the Municipal Council."
Thank you. So we have these duly moved and seconded. So we will start with A, and that is that the report be received for information. We will call the vote.
This is Councillor Lehman. I'll vote yay.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Now B is that the consulting and design service budget no longer required of $13 million previously approved through the multi-year budget be released back to the City Facilities Renewal Reserve Fund. We'll call the vote.
Councillor Lehman votes yay.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 13-2.
Thank you, colleagues. And now we'll be voting on C, which is that Civic Administration proceed with competitive procurement process after the update of the Master Accommodation Plan is complete.
Through the chair, this part will also include the notation of receipt of the communication from C. Butler.
So noted. Thank you.
Councillor Lehman votes yay.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 11-4.
Thank you, colleagues. Under scheduled items, we have three to be heard now. Initially, Tech Alliance, followed by Small Business, our London Small Business Center, and then the London Economic Development Corporation. These are the annual updates. And I will turn it over to Ms. Fox, please.
It appears that I can't be on video, so I will get started. Good afternoon, everybody. For now, let's stay on the rocket ship slide on page 9 in your package. Coincidental, not at all. As our community has come to realize, the past year has been one for change. It's the year of the great pivot, and we're inclined to think that Tech Alliance has experienced More than one transformation. Next slide. With my team, my appointment to CEO began in September 2019, halfway through the fiscal year that I'm reporting on in this presentation. The last time I saw all of you together, I was just days into my new job presenting to PPC, and I had a deep appreciation for our region's globally competitive innovation economy. Today, presenting 17 new metrics aligned to growing our economy and the city's strategic plan, you'll see how Tech Alliance has earned a reputation for fostering a community of dreamers, providing value to world-class leaders, driving economic growth, and propelling ambitious entrepreneurs. Next slide. Working in tandem with a dedicated and accomplished board of directors who once were startup founders too, an unstoppable team, and alongside partners equally as dedicated to enabling innovation and economic prosperity, we ran full speed ahead with a disruptive mindset that is founder focused. Today, I'm joined by my board of directors on the live stream. The numbers speak for themselves and the results are remarkable, and even better, the performance indicators for our current fiscal year, now 8 months in, shatter what I'm presenting today. Next slide. Why? Because we transformed our staff structure, added incredible leaders to our board, created new spaces for innovation to materialize, widened pathways to critical resources, and further shaped a vibrant community of innovation. And we made a brilliant move to London's downtown core. Doesn't this place behind me look really gorgeous? Were we disappointed that we didn't get to throw an open house to show off co-locating technology companies and ecosystem partners and host a repeat of London's best holiday mixer, Jingle and Mingle? You bet we were. This year instead has brought a profound opportunity to harness world-class talent with an engagement of more than 4,000 people. It meant job creation, student talent interactions, and ecosystem referrals like never before. Next slide. It meant putting businesses first. We saw 20 million in capital raised by startups with world-changing ideas. That happened in part because we focused on investor readiness and prepared founders to seek funds. We ensured London is in front of all ranks of government and with media, where stories have picked up nationally. A 718% increase in fiscal year 2020 is impressive, but for fiscal year 2021, we're already above that increase. Next slide. Fostering an entrepreneurial culture supporting natural industry collisions with thousands of advisory hours, we bring people together. I learned that very early Tech Alliance was modest and needed to megaphone London's brand and the innovative founders who were scaling their ventures right here. We'll keep storytelling in a way that attracts talent and new companies. Next slide. We launched key initiatives like Smashing Barriers on International Women's Day and the IABC award-winning London Can, plus our Grow Accelerator for high potential companies. Next slide. On the side of good news, you'll see neat stories showcasing Autodata as the top internship employer for Western. XR Studios focused on virtual reality with the aging population. Zomaron, a London-built fintech company, acquired another Canadian company. Let's not forget that Race Roster was acquired by ASICS, and an executive member of their team is coaching another startup named Cabo, who was on Dragon's Den just this week. Next slide. London has been amplified. It has also been a year of building brand new relationships with council, elected officials, and policymakers from the ground up on behalf of our most promising tech startups and fastest growing companies to ensure their place pre and post pandemic. We need to keep placing bets on innovators in the new economy. This is the message I iterated with my dinner with Minister Jolie, on frequent calls with MPs and MPPs, when Deputy Mayor Helmer hosted us with our funders in February, during my presentation to Ontario's Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs, and during the province's pre-budget consultation alongside Councillor Morgan. Making inroads is my priority. Next step. So how have we adjusted? As we look ahead to an era of great uncertainty, we recognize the boundless opportunity that accompanies such disruption. Continuing to build momentum is a vital resource for companies powered by technology. The final 4 quick slides show how we're more relevant, not just because of COVID, but also because we declared bold, ambitious intentions from the get-go. Next slide. To amplify our reach, we launched Masterclass, Fireside Chats, Instagram Live. We lit Zoom up with content that entrepreneurs need on demand. Next slide. We activated funding for innovation. Through our design challenge, stood it up in 5 days. We behaved like a scrappy startup with our partners and seeded 2 made in London companies with cash they needed to accelerate social and economic prosperity. Next slide. With e-commerce now in play, we enabled Main Street businesses across each of the 5 counties we serve with innovative tools to future-proof and thrive. With additional funds from the province and FedDev, we might just save Christmas after all. Next slide, we're committed to signal boosting tech talent with our diversity and our directory of job seekers and our robust job board. The rebuild roster was born out of a conversation during the mayor's task force, and we remain committed to LCRN and the priority action tables. In closing, next slide, our business landscape remains dynamic. Radical and inspiring change will continue to happen here. Mayor Holder and members of council, last year I made a commitment to you and a promise to our city. We will continue to lift others as we rise. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Fox, and I appreciate you keeping that within the 5 minutes. I've never heard you talk so fast in my life. Comments or questions for Ms. Fox? Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much for the presentation. You really need to amp up your enthusiasm, though, I think, next time you're here. One of the things I really like seeing, and maybe you could just expand on it a little bit, because I actually represent the ward that contains Western University, and I know students are a great source of knowledge and expertise in the city, and they're looking for jobs in the city. So can you help me with how the intern program can lead to full-time employment for students? Because they often say to me that's what they're looking for and that's what they're hoping for. So if you could just expand on that a little, and maybe even tell me if there's other groups you're working with regard to helping them with employment.
Ms. Fox?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question through the chair. The auto data story is one that I highlight because they're certainly proud employers of they're the top employer for internship out of Western, particularly in engineering and comp sci. And having a conversation with my now chair, who is a former COO of auto data, they with pride talked about how they would hire students on internship and keep them on staff. I'm going to say that the number I think was 1/3 or something fairly significant about keeping students on, particularly who were from this region. We certainly speak about student talent that comes out of Fanshawe College and of course Lambton College because of the region that we serve. And we think about the work that's going to be done through the Innovation Village investment at Fanshawe, and where those additional learning experiences, the SILACs, will come through and the opportunity. I know, for example, with Fanshawe, we had a really cool opportunity to have members of the province join us in the city. And they met with the leaders at Media Sonar, who are now located on King Street across from the Covenant Garden Market. And David Struik, who is our vice chair, he speaks very widely about the opportunity to hire the talent out of Fanshawe, and that a great majority of his hires are from Fanshawe because of their specific skill set. So when I think of tech talent and student attraction and retention, I do believe that London's doing a strong job. Could there be more retention opportunities? Absolutely. And you'll see the work that we do with Tech Alliance is we host something called Tech Talent Exchange, the TTX, and we host it both at Fanshawe and Western. And it's an opportunity, almost like a reverse pitch, where students actually go around booths, almost like a job fair, only then there's a pitch by the employers of why they want students to come and work for them. It's fascinating, and it's really embedded in propelling opportunity for students with the types of skills that are needed for the future of work.
Thank you. Councillor Squire?
Yeah, I just want to commend you for making that sort of a specific goal of your organization. And I think if every organization could commit a little bit of their energy towards retaining Western students and giving Western students an opportunity, that would be fantastic. So if you can spread that on to any other organizations, I think that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst. You're on mute, Councillor.
Thank you. And thanks to Tech Alliance. It's always exciting to see what they're doing. I'm looking through some of the highlighted businesses in your appendix. I had a chance to meet them back when we could still meet people, and it's great to see these businesses growing. Yes. And you had a list of many businesses there, and I think it's wonderful. So I look forward to a growing future and hearing about those records that you're smashing for this year. And I also can't wait to come out to another great event. You throw a good party, and there's always really, really interesting people to talk to who have got exciting things on the go. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be really brief. I'll echo everything Councillor Squire said, except to add on, and Fanshawe College students.
I'm sure they're not forgotten. Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions of Ms. Fox? Councillor Kayavaga.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Christina Fox for coming here and sharing this elaborate report that she did for us. I think it has been a challenging year for everyone, and having to figure out ways to be innovative and creative to still function and to still help businesses. I know that there are a few of my volunteers actually who were volunteering with Tech Alliance during the beginning of COVID and supporting businesses who wanted to pivot and go online. So I want to commend you and your staff for all the work that you're doing. And I'm also very interested in continuing the discussion around student retention. It's something that comes up a lot. I do get a lot of volunteers who are students and a lot of mentees that are from the university and from high school and Fenchurch College, believe it or not. And they're all always really interested in talking about some of the ways that we can work on a plan to retain students. We do have quite a large number of students in our city. So if there's any support that you need from us, please let us know so we can continue to work together to make our city great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Ms. Fox, for the presentation. It was very enthusiastic, and I like that. It was great. I shared the mayor's thing, like, how could you speak so fast and yet still be so eloquent in your speech? That was very good. So, but I have some questions to ask, because I'm recognizing that you're here today as an agency, an organization that's receiving city funding, and you're here to show us what you're doing with the funding that you get from us. So you are a regional organization. So can you tell me what other, you mentioned Sarnia-Lambton, what other municipalities are part of the tech, come under your umbrella?
Ms. Fox?
Through the chair, that's a great question. We're the Regional Innovation Center in Ontario that has the largest geographic footprint of all 17 regional innovation centers. And what that means is we span across 5 counties, headquartered here in London, Ontario, and most of our service delivery is actually right here in London, Ontario. We had a strategic focus to do more work in communities like St. Thomas and Woodstock and Sarnia, Strathroy, Goderich. Those are the areas that we could deploy for the resource. And we're finding with the investment through Digital Main Street, both a provincially and federally funded program that we acquired in this current fiscal year, that we're actually able to have a bit more support, particularly with Main Street businesses, for enabling e-commerce technologies within their supply chain and their customer service experience. So it's a really fair question. We certainly steward the investment that's made by the city proportionate to the work that we do in cooperation with you and all of council. It's important for us to continue demonstrating and showcasing London as a community along the innovation corridor in the province, because when we compare ourselves to other bigger regions, perhaps an hour away, my board and I often take a look at what we've got the makings of and how we need to tell just a different story, a less modest story. If you take some of the most recent top or fast-growing companies, and we see many of those London technology companies on those lists, when you compare those to another community nearby that we're often compared to that's about an hour away, our performance on those lists is nearly equivalent, if not better in most cases. So when we think again about the potential for London and the work that my team and I and our board do right in this city, it sort of far outweighs the support that we provide to other cities. And it worries me to say that out loud. Obviously, we want to have strong relationships across our 51 regional partners in each of those communities. And we give a little bit of love to everybody, but we certainly are focused on the opportunity that exists here in the Forest City.
Councillor Cassidy?
A follow up to that, do any of the other municipalities that you mentioned, do they fund into Tech Alliance as well, or is London the only municipal funder? Understanding that you do get the majority of your funding comes from the provincial government.
Ms. Fox?
Yes, through the chair. About 75% of our funding comes through the province, and the other 25% comes from the City of London, and revenue through membership, sponsorship, and ticket sales. We do not receive municipal funding from any other community. And what I find really interesting about that is the fact that we are so well supported by the city. It really puts us in a category with the largest regional innovation centers across Ontario. Some of our smaller peers, some of our smaller regional innovation center peers do not receive municipal funding. And you can see sort of the difference in the connection that they have and the commitment that they have in the prosperity of their cities. So I am certainly grateful that the city has a multi-year agreement with us and that we're able to attach our performance to metrics that are closely aligned with the strategic plan. And I'm also grateful that by having that municipal investment, it puts us in a camp of prosperous regional innovation centers by virtue of their municipal funding.
Councillor?
Thanks. My dog's biting me right now, so I'm a little bit distracted. She's trying to get my attention. Thank you. That's great. And I note that, and I have noted in the past before your tenure, that the innovation corridor comes all the way to London, but mistakenly many people think it stops in that other municipality that's about an hour away and gets all of the attention. And so I think it's very important to me personally and to the City of London in general that Tech Alliance continues to amplify the voice of London region in particular, because that's where I represent. And one final question about the whole regional aspect and this slide of harnessing world-class talent. You give a number of statistics here. Are these jobs created, posted, promoted, increase in employer, all of those stats, are those for the region that you represent, or are they just London? Is there a way in future, and if it's not just London, is there a way that we can get that broken down in the future?
Ms. Fox?
I'm sorry, yes, through the chair, that is another really terrific question. The numbers that we have presented here are against a brand new set of metrics, of which we compiled those metrics with city staff, and then we've retroactively measured them against a fiscal year that we closed. So that is a really good question. What I can say is the majority of those numbers, and by majority I say a pretty significant amount of those numbers, do come specifically from the City of London, particularly the jobs posted, promoted, and created. We often find that jobs that are posted on our job board regularly come from technology companies in London. And we will, in supporting other regional municipalities, there's more work for us to do to make sure that the job growth and the job creation, the promotion in their communities happens as well. But the majority does come from London. And so I'm feeling strong about the fact that we presented these numbers and they are, in a transparent and accountable fashion, that those numbers there do represent the growth that's happened over this year in particular, or this fiscal year over the past fiscal year. And of course, we're looking to the current fiscal year that we're in and being able to take that set of 17 metrics and retroactively apply them to the closed fiscal year and then put that lens on this current fiscal year. We're in good shape.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I just wanted to say to Ms. Fox, well done in a very challenging year. I know you're reporting basically on the year before the pandemic hit, but the pieces that you included in your presentation about some of the ways the organization has pivoted to try and support people as they're navigating a rapidly changing environment, I think it speaks really well to the organization. And certainly I've heard a lot of really positive feedback from tech companies in London, people who are involved in that space, about the direction that Tech Alliance is going. And I think that's in no small part to your leadership. I know you got a great team, and you'd probably be the last person to take credit for any of the good stuff that's happening. But I think it's very clear that Tech Alliance is really providing a lot of value in the community. And I just wanted to say well done on the pivot within your own organization as you're dealing with the pandemic and trying to support tech companies in the city to grow. I think it's really optimistic and positive a presentation that you just provided here today.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on the list, so I'll look for a motion to receive the annual update from Tech Alliance. Is there a mover, please? Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Ms. Fox, thanks very much, and please pass our thanks on to your board and to your membership as well. Colleagues, we now will hear from the London Small Business Center in their annual update, and I believe we will have shortly Executive Director Steve Pellerin on the line. Go ahead if you're ready, Mr. Pellerin.
Great, thank you. Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. Following Christina's presentation, I feel like I should be breaking into a cheer or something right now. I'm sure most of you have a fair understanding of what we do, but I'd like to emphasize two key delivery streams as per slide number 2. Services are available to all Londoners. This includes seminars, information resources, access to business advisors. We strive to provide a basic level of service to everyone without eligibility requirements or consideration of how big or small their ambitions might be. We're here to provide guidance on their entrepreneurial journey. Programs, on the other hand, are far more structured. They're accessed by application, and participants will receive more training, mentoring, in some cases, financial assistance. On slide 3, you'll see that all totaled, we delivered 163 training sessions with almost 1,900 participants. And as per slide 4, our staff alone delivered more than 1,300 consultations, and we engaged 53 volunteers as subject matter experts to help us with our various workshops and courses. We couldn't do what we do without the incredible support of the community. Slide 5 highlights the economic impact. We had 256 businesses launched and expanded, and 375 new jobs reported. As always, I have to note that that's a very conservative number. We don't have the ability to track all clients that access us through the services. So much of this impact is based on the relationships that exist within those structured programs. We don't use multipliers, and every job is an auditable job. And if we can continue to the next slide, now for what I'm sure you're most interested in, and that is our response to COVID-19. As you can see on slides 6 through 7, our response was swift. One day following the closure, we launched our resource portal, which was later partnered with LEDC and the Chamber of Commerce. On March 20th, we released the first impact survey. This shaped our response going forward. More than just measuring impact, we asked how businesses wanted to engage with us. We sped up the investment into some significant technology upgrades, and in the first 4 weeks alone, we were able to serve more than 600 businesses. We addressed over 500 inquiries and conducted 125 virtual consultations. On April 6th, we hosted our first of what would be 14 COVID-related workshops. And on April 25th, after being inspired by many volunteers who reached out to ask how they could help, we created the Small Business Support Squad to help match volunteer subject matter experts to small business inquiries. Now, when speaking of COVID-19, I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the direct impact on our organization. On slide 9, you'll see that we had a 25 to 30% increase in demand across all services. This has been an incredible challenge, as our income also was not immune. We have a dynamic revenue model and experienced an immediate 30% drop. There was one significant casualty, the RISE program for people with mental health and addiction challenges. Based out of Toronto, with their own funding challenges and a move to online training and coaching, they have centralized their services and ended local delivery partnerships. And most importantly, we have seen a spike in the reluctant entrepreneur. Those are people who are starting businesses out of necessity. 34% of inquiries were from people receiving government living income assistance like OWEI, CERB, and presumed unemployed. This will be one of our greatest challenges going forward. It's often the marginalized and people facing barriers to traditional employment that are left behind when the economy starts to recover. I'd like to close by saying that while our mandate is to start and grow businesses, we always put people first. Not everyone we work with will start a business, nor should they. We are here to provide information to help them make informed decisions. Slide 11 speaks to our success in service delivery. And the final slide, slide 12, you will see snapshots of successful Londoners pursuing their passion of business ownership. To see their full stories and more, you can visit our monthly client showcase on our website, where each month we feature a new entrepreneur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pellerin. I'll look to see if colleagues have any comments or questions. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pellerin. You touched a little bit on what I wanted to ask about. And first of all, I mean, to see in your last fiscal year that 256 new businesses have been either launched or expanded with your involvement, I think is given what we've seen the past year, is pretty impressive. So I just wanted you to maybe expand on the COVID aspect of that a little bit. I know a lot of people have the idea of starting a business, but I would have thought right now would be the most challenging time to start a business. So can you sort of touch on for me how it's been going in your fiscal year since COVID in terms of any new businesses starting? Are businesses expanding, or is there a lot of hesitation for people doing that?
Mr. Pellerin?
Yeah, the startup activity itself has not actually changed that much. Certainly it died down obviously in March, the later part of March and April. But I honestly think a lot of people found themselves at home, found themselves able to start thinking about their next big move, i.e. business ownership. I can tell you about 179 jobs were actually reported to us between March and the end of September. So again, that number actually isn't too far off previous years.
Councillor Squire?
And one last thing, do you keep track of, in terms of the businesses you help with the startup, how many actually make it past the initial stages of the enthusiasm, sort of using up the line of credit and are actually long-term successes? Is that something you're able to gauge? Because of course that's the measure ultimately of success.
Mr. Pellerin?
Yeah, admittedly, that is something that we have a challenge with. I mean, when we're working with, thousands of people every year, we can't, just like we can't follow up on where they are with their business. It's difficult. What I can tell you is the statistics from those programs that I talked about. And within the programs, there is it's approaching an 80% success rate within the programs. Now, we only track them through the first 3 years, but again, typically when the people make the commitment to engage in a training program, their rate of success goes up proportionately.
Councillor?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the work you do. I remember visiting you, and and I know the budget is not huge, and even the City of London, it's a moderate contribution. So I think you should be recognized for that work, and so I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, I'll also extend my thanks. I think the programs that you do provide a wonderful service. Many people, and for many of them, it's closing that gap of what they don't know. They don't know coming into business, which is such a challenge. And looking at your record again, 375 new auditable jobs. So that's more than one a day. I wondered how we could get you running a double shift for Londoners. So I think hats off to you there. And again, great to see the list of businesses you've worked with there, and having seen them start out at and met them at some of your events, and now knowing how well they're doing now, that's very encouraging. And 80% after 3 years is quite a success rate for new businesses. So I think that attests to the value of the services you're providing. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think how we get him to do a double shift was a question, so I do not have any other speakers on the list. So I'll look for a motion to receive the annual update from the London Small Business Centre. Moved by Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. We'll call the vote.
Thank you.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Pellerin. Our third update is from the London Economic Development Corporation, and we have Mr. Kapil Lakodia, who will be making that presentation. You have 5 minutes, sir, and when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and my mask might be masking my excitement as well. So thank you for this opportunity to share some updates and highlights from the year. Slide 2, LEDC, as you know, contributes to the growth of our economy through new investment attraction, retention, and growth of local companies, workforce development, and business engagement. These functions are guided by detailed strategies, such as providing access to capital, space, talent, training, etc., and are measured by key performance metrics. This data is available in our strategic plan on the LEDC website and is regularly shared with the city as well. Slide 3. We focus on developing industry clusters that generate the highest economic activity in the region. These clusters not only create direct jobs and investments, but also drive spin-off economic activity through supply chains, construction, retail, hospitality, and more. We have referral mechanisms in place so that companies outside these sectors are also supported by other local agencies. Slide 4. So far this year, LEDC has facilitated $44 million in corporate expansions and attractions. Companies making these investments have reported over 600 jobs being added this year to London's workforce. We've helped companies secure over $18 million in grants and subsidies to support this growth. Slide 5. Since the pandemic began, our work pivoted immediately to help companies procure PPEs, access government relief programs, and gain vital information on changing regulations, workforce management, health and safety, and more. We hosted numerous webinars to share information and best practices with local employers. We hosted virtual job fairs, virtual industry conferences, and virtual marketing initiatives to engage companies and talent. This includes creating a COVID-19 business hub to aggregate key information, supports, and resources for companies in our community. Slide 6. These are some examples of companies that are new to London or growing significantly by making capital investments and increasing their workforce throughout 2020. Slide 7. The Invest portfolio seeks to attract new investments from external markets, while the Accelerate portfolio helps established companies in London scale up their existing operations. We did this by connecting companies to infrastructure, funding sources, regulatory and permitting processes, R&D, and assistance with talent recruitment and retention. This year, we saw major growth in manufacturing, food processing, and digital creative industries. We also keep a pulse on companies that may be at risk of closure due to trade issues, lost contracts, or changes in their industries. Despite the pandemic, our pipeline of active attraction and expansion files was healthy as we pivoted to virtual platforms for trade shows and lead generation activities. Slide 8. Some of the highlights of the year included attracting a leading producer of sustainable proteins, a generic pharmaceuticals manufacturer, as well as an aerospace company. Slide 9. Our workforce development portfolio pivoted to hold 2 virtual job fairs this year, along with several webinars to assist employers with their hiring needs. In partnership with Fanshawe, we delivered a series of seminars for small and medium-sized businesses to help them develop better HR competencies. We also assisted post-secondary institutions in understanding the needs of local employers so their training programs can be designed accordingly. For example, we worked with King's University College on their new King's Promise initiative to better match students with local career opportunities. At the heart of all our programs is business engagement. Throughout the year, we use webinars, social media, newsletters, as well as the COVID-19 Business Hub to engage with our local and external audiences. We also held virtual training for small companies looking to improve their e-commerce and online marketing. Slide 10. We participated in several recovery initiatives underway this year at the local, provincial, and federal levels. For instance, we're working with local partners on food entrepreneurship, tourism revival, downtown relief, and more. We're working with FedDev Ontario on supporting local companies to scale up, such as the Factory Bucket news, which was announced last week. And with that, that's the end of my formal presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lakoti. I'll look to see if any of our colleagues have comments or questions. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The one thing I wanted to ask you about, because you've been around working with people for a while. How do you work, or how do you make sure that you're interacting with the 2 other groups that we heard from earlier, the Small Business Center and Tech Alliance? Because it seems to me that there's a synergy that should exist between the 3 of you. So maybe you could just help me understand how that would work.
Mr. Lacotia?
Thank you. Through the chair. Thanks for the question. This is the referral mechanism that I spoke of. Our staff along the three organizations know each other and regularly refer clients back and forth depending on where the best fit would be. Some of the examples I cited in the presentation, such as the COVID-19 Business Hub, is done jointly between ourselves, the Chamber of Commerce, and Small Business Center. There are lots of other initiatives throughout the year that are done in partnership with other organizations. So the referral mechanism is tracked internally in our CRM system. We do track when files come in, and if it's a better place for Tech Alliance or Small Business Center, our staff makes the appropriate referrals. So those are some examples of how the three organizations coordinate the activity.
Councillor Squire.
Yeah, I think in the past, at least when I first started, as a councillor, there were some, you occasionally meet someone who would say the three organizations didn't work as well or should work better together. That's not something I've heard lately. So I just wanted to commend you for that, because to me that means that you are working together and using all of your resources for the one goal. So I want to thank you and thank all of the groups for that.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I might just
go ahead, please, Mr. Lacotia.
Sorry about that. To Councillor Squire's point, this is never a start or stop process. I think it's a constant evolution. So I think not just our three organizations, but several others in the community, including Tourism London, Downtown London, other BIAs. What COVID has certainly taught us is a way to streamline these efforts, to make sure communication is open, and constantly look for these opportunities. So I just say this is not going to be ever a start or stop process. We'll constantly keep working towards it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to piggyback on Councillor Squire's question there, are amongst the three agencies between Tech Alliance and Small Business Center and LADC, are there gaps that remain unattended to, that perhaps council needs to be putting its attention to, or is there a fairly good adjacency between the three agencies that ensures that none of those opportunities for business are missed?
Mr. Lacotia.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you for the question. It's a really interesting one. I would say between the three organizations, the gaps would be there are certain industries that we cater to more than others. But within our community, I would say those gaps don't exist, as in there are other agencies that are also there. So I'll give you some examples to help put this in context as well. We have Downtown London. We have BIAs that also cover a lot of the Main Street focused businesses. I know between our organization, Small Business Center would be the closest that would come to serving Main Street businesses. But even then, a lot of their work is focused in other areas of small businesses as well. So I know from an LADC standpoint, we focus on the key drivers of our economy, as I mentioned in the earlier slides. There are technology-focused industries. There are core focus areas within all three organizations. Whatever gaps there exist between our three organizations are definitely catered to amongst other groups in London, like the BIAs. So I'm not sure if that addresses the question adequately. I can give you some more examples if that's helpful.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Lacotia. Yeah, that's quite helpful. So I think the next question that I have is around what you're hearing from prospective employers and current employers looking to expand within the city. With respect to the impact of COVID, obviously it's going to be early days for what that might mean for commercial land needs, whether that's commercial office space, Class A space, or whether that's industrial development space. But is that having an impact, and do you see that having an impact in the future in terms of our available inventories, or do you see that actually expanding our inventories and creating a bit of a liability on having too much on hand?
Mr. Lacotia.
Thank you. Through the chair. So when the pandemic was starting to unfold, the previous projections suggested that there would be a drop in corporate investments. A lot of the head offices would be gun shy to make large, significant decisions on capital expansions, making multi-million-dollar investments and so on. throughout the year, we've been pleasantly surprised in terms of how many, not just inquiries we've had for attractions and expansions, but how many of them have had successful completions. We've had lots of positive land absorption through the year, lots of new greenfield projects, as well as existing company expansions, which has suggested that the core industries in our community, in our region, which includes manufacturing industries, food and beverage processing, and so on, they have not only stayed stable, they've actually grown significantly despite the pandemic. Of course, as it's well documented and as you all well know, much of the impact has been felt in accommodation, tourism, hospitality, Main Street businesses, and so on. But if you look at the land needs side of the equation, we've had lots of positive absorption. In fact, we are monitoring the inventory in the industrial land development strategy to ensure that our new land supplies is equivalent to the type of inquiries and projected land absorption needs we are looking at.
Councillor Turner?
That's very helpful.
Thank you. I have Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the LEDC for all they're doing, especially filling up our industrial land. I see regularly coming to council is a sale of a piece of land or the action on an option for those things, and we see expansions happening. That's very exciting and encouraging. I would hate to think what would become of London if this sort of work was not being done. My question, having seen the encouraging things that have happened this year, maybe just towards the future, can you give us a sense of what might be coming up for 2021?
Mr. Lacotia?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might have to use that crystal ball the mayor spoke of earlier. But in terms of the pipeline of activities we're looking at, food and beverage continues to be very strong. So not only are we getting a lot of good inquiries from external markets, our existing cluster of food and beverage companies continues to expand and find new markets. So that's one area you can expect further growth in 2021. Within advanced manufacturing sector, there's been a lot of effort made to diversify that sector significantly. So when I say diversification, I mean traditionally the reliance within our region was very heavy on transportation equipment manufacturing. There's been a lot of effort underway to diversify into defense, aerospace, building products manufacturing, just to give you some examples. I think that's an area that will continue to grow in 2021 as well. And then finally, the digital creative sector is something that we're paying good attention to. With remote working becoming more prevalent, we anticipate that impact to grow the digital creative sector further in 2021 as well.
Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, thank you. Well, those encouraging things. I might have a question for you regarding the food and beverage. Just maybe your own comments about the security of our supply chain for food in the London area.
Mr. Lacotia?
Thank you. Through the chair. That's one of the leading reasons why London has been very attractive for some of these new food and beverage attractions. London is uniquely positioned in terms of how we draw our fresh water supply. We're surrounded by a lot of farmland, of course, the heart of the agricultural farm belt in Ontario, that helps companies procure a lot of the ingredients and the raw materials. So from a sustainability standpoint, I know the type of inquiries we're getting, such as a recently announced Aspire Food Group that is in the development of sustainable proteins. All of these companies have reflected on the abundance of raw materials and ingredients required for sustainable operations. So I think we're in great shape from that standpoint.
Councillor Van Holst?
Well, yes, well, thank you very much. And then maybe I'll make a quick shout out to the Elgin and Lake Huron water boards for their contribution to London's attractiveness. Thank you.
Funny you mention those. That may come up a little later on. Thank you very much, Councillor Van Holst. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Mr. Lacotia, for your presentation. I have a question about the whole site selection process. So you mentioned the industrial land development strategy. I think that has always, especially in recent years, some of the big successes that you've had, Maple Leaf Foods and some of the others, and part of that success was reliant upon the industrial land development strategy, having that serviced land. So I think, that really helps us to attract these companies in food processing and in manufacturing. How important in the other areas that are your key sectors, especially digital, creative, and professional services, how important is the whole site selection process, and do you play as heavy a role in that process for those sectors as you do in manufacturing and food processing?
Mr. Lacotia.
Thank you. Through the chair. So every industry sector and every client that we would work with, of course, have sort of different timelines, different nuances involved on the site selection side of things. Whenever we are looking at greenfield projects, whether it's in manufacturing or food processing, there's typically a higher level of due diligence and background work involved because we're dealing with greenfield sites. And depending on where head offices might be, there are different engineering teams and a different host of experts that are involved on both sides. So greenfield projects typically take longer. When we're looking at professional services or digital creative or office users, we are typically dealing in shorter timelines. We're really reliant on head offices to make a decision in terms of the cost structures and space utilization and things of that nature. But typically they are faster timelines. Look at companies like Carfax, Factory Bucket that have expanded through the year and have absorbed office space. Those decisions have typically been made in a shorter timeline, I would say less than a year. We've had lots of companies from overseas that have taken as long as 3 to 5 years to make a decision on a greenfield site. And that's not uncommon at all, whether they're from Germany, Korea, or a London company looking to expand. That just gives you a sense for how the timelines shape up from a site selection standpoint.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you for that answer. Do you see any value in the city having some kind of similar sort of process or a similar strategy as the industrial land development strategy, but for the office sector? And, this sort of touches again on when you spoke about collaboration. So, do you work with downtown London when there's a prospective employer looking at London? Do you look to see what available office space there is in downtown London? And again, like, just to reframe my question, do you see a value in having some ready office space in the different tiers, A, B, or C, or whatever, to attract these kinds of employers, the way we attract the manufacturing and food processing industries with our industrial land?
Mr. Lacotia.
Thank you. Through the chair. That's a really interesting question. The reason why we've had a lot of success in industrial land is because we have a council endorsed industrial land development strategy that mandates staff to have an inventory of shovel-ready industrial land readily available at any given point in time. Which means when we have inquiries from companies that are looking to expand or come to Canada to set up a new facility, we don't have to wait to turn dirt, install services, bring in power, all of those things. Because of that industrial land development strategy in place, we constantly have an inventory of marketable sites ready. The city is in sort of a lead control position on greenfield sites, which has paid lots of dividends over the last 10, 15 years or so. I think something equivalent would certainly be helpful in terms of having readily available commercial spaces as well to offer to companies when they're looking to make that move. I think generally speaking, when companies want to expand, they want to do it rather quickly. And most of these companies are not really in the development space. So having access to shovel-ready infrastructure, move-in ready spaces, definitely helps improve our chances of landing more investments.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. That's good.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lakota. for your presentation as well. And I really appreciate the questions and answers here. It's quite informative. And I want to also thank LEDC for the work through the COVID recovery that we've been going through. I know I've often looked to LEDC for their comments as we look at recovering as a city. My question is, how have you as a corporation, I know a lot of organizations and corporations are using that word pivot, how we have changed, what we need to do. My question is, how has LEDC changed to deal with the challenges of the city and the need to recover?
Mr. Lacotia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair, throughout the year, we kept identifying opportunities to assist our colleagues, our partners in the city, no matter what LEDC's focus area was. So at the early part of my slides, I talked about, 5 industry areas we focus in. Doesn't mean we wouldn't talk to Tourism London, Downtown London, and others to find out what are some of those gaps or areas where LEDC might be able to assist. It doesn't have to be a gap necessarily. If we could amplify their work, if we could lend a helping hand, those are small ways of us showing those pivots. Launching these business hubs or finding platforms to relay information on daily changes in government programs, whether it's relief programs, grants, incentives, how to procure PPEs. All of those were little nuggets of pivots that we had to make every day. I just wanted to draw attention to how we didn't just fixate on, manufacturing, food processing, technology, and so on. Smaller businesses, downtown, BIAs, all of these areas, we were trying to constantly find opportunities to support their clients, which are London companies. And at the end of the day, we felt that during the pandemic, every business needed support, no matter what industry, no matter what size. So we tried to do whatever we could to provide that support.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for that. And you did make that comment about government support, because there is a lot of government support out there, and how is that communicated to businesses, and how do businesses get back to getting those government supports? So I really appreciate that pivoting that LEDC has done, and really congratulate you and encourage you to continue the support that you give our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Helmer. Excuse me, I apologize, Deputy Mayor. I had Councillor Lehman ahead of you. I apologize. Councillor Lehman.
I got to get my name to the top of the list to get your attention. Before COVID hit, London and our area was leading in job creation, and looks like we are coming out of this as well in the same position. The CBC reported on the September numbers that we're adding jobs at a faster rate than Toronto, Kitchener-Waterloo, Hamilton, and Windsor. So to Tech Alliance and London Small Business Center and the LEDC, job well done in assisting with job creation in our area. As we discussed earlier tonight, the work environment is drastically changing, especially on the remote work opportunities that are being presented with COVID. So my question to Mr. Kapil is, how are you pivoting in your prospecting practices to exploit those opportunities to enhance or to present London as a potential for that workforce to migrate? Are you speaking to large employers, especially in the tech side and the information side, in the GTA, about the advantages of considering London in remote satellite offices and moving workers down the 401?
Mr. Lacotia?
Thank you. Through the chair, we're trying to deploy the right technology for the right environment. To give you some examples, for external companies looking at Canada or Ontario to set up their new locations, we've engaged in drone footage of our industrial parks, to give you one example of how we are trying to deploy technology and be contemporary during this time to show our industrial assets to companies far away. In fact, we have created an inventory of different type of video and drone footage for this purpose, which we hope to deploy in other venues as well, such as trying to attract film companies and whatnot. Many of these electronic repositories can be deployed in various fashions. We held virtual job fairs, and not surprisingly enough, a lot of attendees in the virtual job fairs came from the GTA, because travel is, of course, not an issue now. Those are two specific examples of virtual technologies being deployed in some of these portfolios. Throughout the year, there were lots of other virtual platforms. In fact, our Manufacturing Matters conference was virtual on a trade show platform that also attracted a lot of companies from GTA and other parts of Canada. Later this month, we are going to be deploying an advertising campaign in Toronto to attract some of those workers to London that would be, amiable for remote working and whatnot. So those are some examples of how we are using technology and trying to stay nimble during the COVID environment.
Councillor Lehman, you're good. Thank you. Your turn, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you, Mr. Lakota. I just wanted to ask about the trade situation. Obviously, there have been impacts from some of the public health measures that have impacted trade across the border into the United States, but there's also been, how do I put this, higher levels of unpredictability over the past few years in terms of trade policy with the United States. And I wonder sort of where you think things are at right now and where you think they might be headed over maybe the next year or so.
Mr. Lakota.
Thank you. Through the chair, anytime you have trade agreements that are being, renegotiated, it creates a certain sense of not panic, but a certain sense of uncertainty in our supply chains. Most of this is tied to transportation industries that have a lot of parts movement across the border. Certainly food and beverage has some impacts as well based on our ability to attract raw materials, and some of our processors send finished goods to the US, and oftentimes there are some restrictions that can come up from time to time. I would say throughout the year, most of our manufacturers, no matter what industry they're looking at, were fairly content with how things were rolling from a trade standpoint. We didn't hear any significant concerns or companies at risk of losing contracts because of trade issues. Going forward in 2021, there's a general sense of satisfaction in terms of where we have landed on the USMCA. In fact, there are some areas where Canadian manufacturers have an advantage between where our dollar is currently, between some of these trade agreements like the USMCA that have landed in a decent area. I expect 2021 to be quite stable from a trade and export and movement of goods standpoint. Even during the pandemic, most of the companies we spoke to that do regular export of finished product from London to the United States didn't face any significant delays. There were early day learning curves, as you would imagine, but once the process was well understood, I think all things considered, it worked out relatively okay.
Definitely. Okay, thanks very much. Colleagues, I see no other questions for our guest. Therefore, I'll look for a motion to receive the annual update from the London Economic Development Corporation. Moved by Councillor Kayavaga, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. We'll call the question.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hopkins?
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Councillor Van Holst, I see you have your hand up. May I ask, is that is there something that we can support?
No, sir, I would just have moved or seconded that motion.
Very thoughtful, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Lakota, for your presentation as well. Colleagues, I'll turn your attention to items for direction. The first is 4.1, tabling of the 2021 budget update. And I'll turn this over to our budget chair, Councillor Morgan, to begin, please.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the tabling of the annual budget update. A little bit different than you've seen in previous years in that the budget documents were delivered to councillors a day earlier than they usually are. And also posted online earlier so that the public can certainly have access to this and follow along as we present the budget. What will happen today too is the treasurer will go through the presentation as you received it and as is posted online. So for those following along at home, specific references will be made to the slides as we go through them. So if you would like to follow along on london.ca, you can certainly go to the council meeting link in the main menu there, and then to this particular meeting of SPPC, the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, and you'll be able to get the agenda there and read along in the documents if you want to follow along. And so the treasurer and her team will make specific references to the slides so that you can certainly follow along. Just a little bit different given the distancing situation that we have this year, but we certainly want everybody to be able to follow along. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the treasurer so she can lead us through her tabling presentation.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think certainly this is a very unusual year that I find myself tabling a budget from a remote work scenario. So we are going to walk through the budget. Certainly one of the key things when you look at slide 2, there are 2 very key documents that we have brought forward and have been included as part of the added agenda. There is the tax supported budget, SURLOX, which is available online, as well as the water and wastewater treatment budget, which is also available online. So I think, first of all, I do want to start off to say a huge thank you to my finance staff who have pulled this document together with very unusual situations and a little bit more challenging than usual. But I think a huge thank you to them, to SLT for all their assistance, for being able to submit the budget amendments and to work together and make this process come together in time with a great deal of uncertainty. So I think as we move along, just to walk you through the agenda on slide 3. So essentially, we'll just walk you through a refresher of what was approved at this year's multi-year budget on March the 2nd, and then give you a bit of a recap in terms of where we're at as well for both the tax supported as well as the water and wastewater budgets. There are some new things in terms of the equity and inclusion and gender lens, which we will walk you through in terms of how we've applied that to the budget. We will give you an overview of what is contained within these documents in terms of amendments and how that ends up impacting the recommended budget that we are submitting for council's deliberations beginning on December the 10th and 11th. So there are a couple of other added budget amendments that we are following. So we bring those to your attention just as an emerging issue. And also to note, I guess, COVID and what impact it's had on the budget and how we plan to deal with those changes over the 2021 year, in addition to all of the key dates in the budget process and the public engagement overview. So on slide 4, there's a beautiful diagram there that signifies the entire multi-year budget process. So on March the 2nd of earlier this year, and just before COVID hit, council approved their 4-year multi-year budget. That was the second in which we have brought forward for council's approval. So you'll see the red circle, which shows you we're in the middle of our second annual update. This year 2, which is our annual update to the multi-year budget. So when you look at normally the process that we would follow, it's an opportunity to bring forward amendments. So on slide 5, you'll see that we have generally 3 categories of amendments that are brought forward. There's newer, reduced, or changed regulations. We don't really have any of those that are applicable in terms of the amendments. New council directions have an opportunity to come forward, as well as cost and revenue drivers, which are primarily what is behind the amendments that are being brought forward and recommended to you today. So on slide 6, you will see our graph that shows what was approved on March the 2nd of this year. So for the average residential property with an assessed value of 241,000, I'm sorry, in 2019. The average annual increase is 3.8, with the property tax impact of $116. So these numbers are slightly restated because of the impacts of some recalculations. So they've changed slightly from what you would have seen as a result of the assessment growth and recalculating. There was some rounding there that changes those numbers slightly. So this is 2021 was originally approved at 4.4%. So the average 3.8, you'll see the picture that is there. So essentially that sets the stage for the starting point of the budget amendments that we are bringing forward to you today. One of the key changes that the Civic Administration did as part of the budget process was the application of the equity and inclusion and gender equity lens. So on slide 7, it summarizes that although we did identify on September 22nd at the SPPC meeting that Civic Administration did recommend the development of a new lens, we wanted to make sure that there was a first step in terms of moving forward, applying that lens to the multi-year budget. So we didn't have a lot of time, but we wanted to ensure that we started to move that work forward. So as an interim step to get something included, what we did was we were able to work through the anti-racism and anti-oppression lens that is currently existing. And our working group worked through all of the lenses and went through every single budget amendment to include some comments for consideration as part of our budget amendment. So you'll see the picture at the bottom of slide 7. So every single budget amendment that's being presented to you has the application of that lens through the use of the assistance of our working group to put that forward and to ensure that every single budget amendment was viewed using those lenses. So when you move to slide 8, I think one of the great things was that they also looked at how we could move forward in the process and start to identify how this will start to roll out in future budgets to develop better use of this tool and better use in the process to ensure that these lenses are built right in. So on page 15 of our budget document and the tax supported document, there's a very good summary of all the ways that we will be moving forward to use these lenses in future budgets to evolve the process. So we bring forward, with the limited time we had, the first step, but it's a very good framework and path forward of how we're going to ensure those considerations are brought forward to each and every budget moving forward. So certainly as new tools are developed, we will be able to use those. Also, as we expand it, we'll be able to look at the existing budget. We'll be able to look at additional investment business cases coming forward, as well as our business plans, et cetera. So there's a really good framework to start to begin and increase that process going forward. And then, of course, there are other tools that might be expanded to include, such as the climate emergency screening tool, which is also in process of coming forward. So that's really the high-level overview. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Kyle Murray, who is going to walk you through the amendments that have been included in the budgets that are included on the added agenda.
Thanks, Annalisa. So there are 8 budget amendments included in the 2021 budget update SIRLOCs, 6 operating amendments and 2 capital budget amendments. The first budget amendment relates to RBC Place. As you all know, RBC Place has been experiencing significant financial challenges this year due to the inability to host events. At the June 29th council meeting, council approved a 1-year deferral of the 2020 payment owing on RBC Place's outstanding note payable to the City of London. Through budget amendment number 1, RBC Place is seeking forgiveness of the remaining loan. This amendment does not have a tax levy impact. However, it would reduce the expected future inflows into the Efficiency, Effectiveness, and Economy Reserve, which was the original funding source for the loan to RBC Place. Budget amendment number 4 relates to childcare. So you may recall that additional funding for childcare was approved through the 2020 to 2023 MYB for the ongoing operating costs associated with the expansion of licensed childcare spaces. So with the onset of COVID, the construction of new childcare centers has been delayed and therefore the required funding will not be necessary in 2021. It should be noted, however, that this funding will remain in the budget as approved in 2022 and future years. This is only a one-time proposed reduction. So on slide 10, budget amendment number 5 relates to the Middlesex London Health Unit. And again, as part of the multi-year budget, you'll recall that increased municipal funding was approved related to provincial cost-sharing changes for public health. And recently, the Ministry of Health announced that additional mitigation funding is available to fully offset increased costs for municipalities in both 2020 and 2021. I will note, however, once again, that this is a one-time proposed reduction, and significant uncertainty exists regarding public health funding in 2022 and future years. Budget amendment number 6 relates to Ontario Works. And again, through the MYB that was approved back in March, Council approved additional funding for the Ontario Works program in light of provincial funding changes that occurred. However, with the onset of COVID and the various relief and recovery benefits that have been offered by the Government of Canada, this has meant that the Ontario Works program has experienced a decrease in employment-related expenses, and they anticipate that this reduction will continue into 2021. So once again, this is a one-time reduction in 2021 only. On slide 11, with respect to budget amendment number 7, an internal service review was conducted last year to determine the full costs that should be charged to the water, wastewater, and joint water boards associated with the corporate services that are provided to those service areas. And that review determined that the full costs were not being recovered. So the increased costs were reflected in the water, wastewater, and joint water boards multi-year budgets that were approved back in March. However, due to timing constraints, we were not able to reflect the additional revenue on the property tax budget in time for publication of the multi-year budget. So this amendment is coming forward this year. It reflects a permanent increase in revenue in the property tax supported budget, and therefore a permanent reduction to the tax levy. Regarding budget amendment number 8, the corporation maintains a contingency budget, and we frequently review that contingency budget to ensure that it is sufficient for both known and anticipated expenditures. We reviewed the contingency budget this year and have identified some savings, noting that we do believe that this reduction that we are proposing in budget amendment number 8 can be managed despite the anticipated COVID impacts that we are likely to face next year. On slide 12, as I previously mentioned, there are 2 capital budget amendments this year. Neither of them have tax levy impacts. Amendment number 2 reflects some minor adjustments to RBC Place's capital plan, which are based on a building condition assessment that was conducted earlier this year. Budget amendment number 3 reflects unanticipated repairs that are required to the fire suppression system at the material recovery facility. And this is essentially advancing funds in the capital plan to 2021 from future years in order to complete this urgently required work. So on slide 13, incorporating the 8 budget amendments that I've summarized for you, this results in a reduction in the 2021 tax levy from 4.4% to 3.8%. Collectively, these amendments also reduce the 4-year average tax levy increase slightly, but the average increase does remain at a rounded 3.8% on average. Slide 14 provides a bit of a high-level overview of the capital plan. As I noted, the real only changes to the capital plan are the 2 budget amendments that I've talked about. It should also be noted that the capital plan included in the 2021 budget update does incorporate all changes outlined in the 2021 development charges update. So on slide 15, We also wanted to make committee aware of other budget amendments that may be forthcoming prior to budget deliberations. So at the council meeting on November 10th, council endorsed the preparation of a budget amendment to support implementation of the film and multimedia strategy, as was outlined in a report to the Community and Protective Services Committee on November 3rd. Also, earlier today, the Civic Works Committee received an update report on the 60% waste diversion action plan, which included an updated implementation schedule, as well as updated funding requirements, and a proposed budget amendment that will be forwarded to budget deliberations if endorsed by council. So on slide 16, there are also a couple of other matters that we are aware of that may affect the 2021 budget update. So there's a report on the November 5th Middlesex London Health Unit Finance and Facilities Committee meeting agenda that outlined anticipated 2021 cost pressures totaling approximately $700,000. It's not clear to us yet whether these cost pressures will be the responsibility of the health unit's municipal funding partners or not. And we expect to receive further information after the Board of Health meeting, which is to occur on November the 26th. We are also awaiting confirmation of the 2021 land ambulance budget from the county. We expect to receive further information on the 2021 land ambulance budget in late November. So on slide 17, this is a summary of the tax levy impact in the event that council approves the additional 60% waste diversion action plan budget amendment. So this budget amendment would reduce the 2021 tax levy increase to 3.5%, noting that the 4-year average tax levy increase remains at 3.8% rounded. So slide 18 may look familiar to committee, as this was included in our June 23rd SPPC report on COVID-19 financial impacts. And this graphic outlines the process that we would recommend should you wish to reconsider any of the budget decisions that you made during last year's multi-year budget process. This would essentially involve working in reverse order to the process that you use to deliberate the multi-year budget. I'll also note that we've included Appendix H in the property tax supported budget document, which will assist council in working through this process if you wish to pivot on any of those decisions that you made last year. This appendix, Appendix H, itemizes the various business cases and provincial impacts that were approved through the multi-year budget, which comprise the tax levy impact in each respective year of the multi-year budget. So slide 19, we've outlined a number of COVID-19 response and recovery principles that we've utilized over the course of the past year. We'd encourage council to take these into consideration as you consider any decisions to make any further reductions. I'm not going to go into detail on these, but they are listed on slide 19 for your further review. On slides 20 and 21, once again, if you're considering any further reductions to the budget, we would certainly encourage council to keep in mind a number of our longstanding financial principles, which are detailed on slides 20 and 21. Again, I'm not going to go through them individually. So on slides 22 and 23, we're moving along to the water and wastewater and treatment budgets. So you'll have received a separate budget document for water and wastewater, as Annalisa noted. Slides 22 and 23 provide a high-level overview of the water and wastewater budgets, noting that there are no budget amendments for either of those budgets this year. And as a reminder, council approved the 2021 to 2023 rates for both water and wastewater on October 27th. So moving along to slide 24, certainly without a doubt, we anticipate that that COVID will continue to have a significant impact on our 2021 budget. And in fact, our current estimates at this time are that that impact is likely to be at least $20 million in magnitude, if not more. At this point, approximately 11 million of that projected 20 million is the projected impact coming from London Transit. So certainly significant impacts that we're still anticipating to experience next year. You'll also recall that a financial sustainability review is currently underway for RBC Place, and we anticipate that that review will provide greater insight into the impacts of COVID on that organization moving forward, as well as any potential funding support that may be required from the city. So slide 25 outlines how we intend to mitigate the impact of COVID on our 2021 budget. And I think one of the themes of this year's budget is that we don't yet know which financial challenges will be permanent in nature. So the 2021 budget really avoids making any premature permanent changes to the budget until we get more experience on which impacts will in fact be permanent or longer lasting in nature. So to manage the impacts in 2021, we intend to use a variety of strategies, much like we did in 2020. This could include things like temporary adjustments to service levels. We could look at potentially deferring capital projects or adjusting the sources of financing for those projects. We could look at strategic one-time draws from reserves or reserve funds to mitigate temporary impacts. And of course, we're going to continue to advocate for federal and provincial support for any COVID-related pressures that we experience in 2021 as well. So needless to say, Civic Administration will certainly actively monitor the corporation's 2021 financial position, and we will regularly report to Council with recommended strategies to address the pressures that we face next year. Slide 26 outlines the key dates in this year's budget process. So we have a public participation meeting scheduled for December 7th at 4 p.m. We have 2 days of budget deliberations scheduled for December 10th and December 11th if necessary. And we're working towards final council approval of the 2021 budget update on January 12th. Slide 27 outlines our planned public engagement activities for the 2021 budget update. Of course, COVID has certainly restricted our ability to conduct in-person public engagement this year. So despite that challenge, we are moving forward with an engagement plan that utilizes a number of different channels, including some new methods of engaging that we're using this year as well. So we'll use various means of engagement, including social media, digital advertising, digital newsletters, radio advertising, print advertising. We're going to make use of the getinvolved.london.ca website to provide education on the budget, as well as guidance on how to get more information or to submit feedback. We're, of course, having the public participation meeting on December 7th. And the budget team is certainly happy to support councillors' engagement activities as well, whether that's a virtual town hall that you're perhaps planning, or materials to support engagement activities, or any other ideas. We're certainly here to help. We're, of course, available to attend virtual meetings with community groups, and also to answer any phone calls or emails from Londoners as well. We're also planning to provide email updates via a newsletter that you can sign up for on the Get Involved website as well. So those are all of the slides that we have for you today. Thanks for your attention, and certainly we're happy to answer any technical questions on this year's budget process that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Barbon and Mr. Murray. We will do questions, technical questions and questions of our staff in a moment. However, I want to read out the motion that is associated with this, given it wasn't in the original documents. It is that the following actions be taken with respect to the draft 2021 tax-supported annual update and the draft water and wastewater treatment budget's annual update. A, the draft budget documents be referred to the 2020 to 2023 multi-year annual budget update process. And B, the overview presentation as appended to the added agenda by the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer with respect to the 2021 budget update be received. It being noted that the following documents were provided to members and are available on the city's website: the draft supported budget, 2021 annual update, and draft water and wastewater treatment and 2021 annual update. So that's the motion to basically let us have the budget tabled and start the process. I'd look for a mover on that. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Okay, discussion, questions for our staff. Councillor Squire. Sorry? Oh.
Thank you. As you know, and this, I hope this is technical, am I to understand that boards and commissions are not allowed or can't come back and ask for any changes to their budgets, meaning increased money in terms of the 2021 budget? I don't see any requests. I don't see any business cases. So is that your understanding from what they've been informed, that that they're not going to be allowed, or they're not going to be bringing forward any budget amendments to cover ongoing COVID losses or something like that?
Ms. Bourbon.
Through the chair. So certainly if there are permanent changes, people were to bring forward budget amendments, particularly with respect to COVID. We are treating them as temporary changes at this point in time, because we don't know if they're going to permanently increase the tax requirements after 2021. So certainly we had tried to limit the number of increases coming forward unless they were fully justified and based on approval. There have been, luckily, mostly reductions. However, certainly the Convention Center put forward a request for the promissory note, and there may be additional funding requests coming forward specifically to support them for COVID. But from a base budget approval, we were not of any understanding there were any budget amendments that needed to come forward, although there is a potential one that we are noting from the health unit that would be subject to the Board of Health approval next week.
So do I take that to mean that other than the ones we're seeing in terms of budget amendments for boards and commissioners, other than what we're seeing in this report, there aren't any? Is that, it's not a trick question, I just want to find that out.
Through the chair, that's correct. There are no other amendments other than what you see from the boards and commissions, just the one from the RBC Place and the Middlesex London Health Unit, a reduction for this year for 2021 of their provincial funding, which a temporary allocation was provided. So that was deferred to 2022.
Thank you.
Okay, next for technical questions of our staff, I have Councillor Lewis and then Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. Staff, I have some questions, and in particular, it's going to follow up on what Councillor Squire was just referring to. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. We've got a $610,000 reduction in health unit costs as a result of provincial funding coming forward to close a gap that we would have otherwise been filling. But we've also been made aware, and I understand that this hasn't gone to the board yet, so I realize that you can't necessarily speak to it in full, but that although the provincial funding came through for the health unit to mitigate their costs this year, they're going to be asking us for another $700,000 plus next year, and that's not COVID related mitigation, but just simply increasing costs that they have not found a way to internalize yet, and we don't know whether they're going to ask us for it or whether they can internalize it. It's just sort of a flag for us right now. Is that, I guess I'm asking staff if that's accurate.
Ms. Bourbon.
Through the chair. So through our conversations with the health unit, so if you'll recall in the March 2nd approval of the multi-year budget, through the provincial downloading, there were cost sharing increases that were made as a result of the health unit's cost sharing. So it was capped at a 10% increase over the previous year. So that was what was approved. That is the $610,000 that had been included as part of the multi-year budget that was approved for the 2021. Through discussions with the health unit, they confirmed that there will be provincial funding allocated so that that 10% increase in cost sharing that was required through the regulation will not be required. So that is why the amendment was put forward. So through Civic Administration's monitoring of the boards and commissions minutes and meetings that they have held, there was, through discussion with them, that they brought forward a report that went to their Finance and Facilities Committee, noting that they were having permanent increases that they were looking that they may not be able to mitigate. So we are simply flagging it for you at this point. Through discussions with their staff, they have identified that that will be going forward to the Board of Health for a decision. So we are simply noting that that could be subject to the Board of Health's recommendation, something we may see an increase for. So we thought, given it had already been public, that we should bring that to Council's attention just in case that were to come forward.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you for that. So I just really want to be clear that this request, though, although it hasn't come to us yet, and the board still may look at other options, this is not related to COVID cost mitigations, and that the province has in fact provided another funding source for health units to deal with COVID costs. The number escapes me off the top of my head. I feel like it was 10 million. There was a $10 million fund or something like that through the province. But is that accurate? This is not COVID-related costs, to the best of your knowledge, understanding that this has not gone to their board yet.
Through the chair, so that is our understanding. They are not COVID-related costs. They are pressures that they are experiencing related specifically to some inflationary increases that they had not previously budgeted for and need to cover, as well as some facility-related pressures. So my understanding, and through our discussions with the health unit staff, they are definitely not COVID-related. This is over and above other pressures that they need to fund.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Budget Chair. So when I read through this, expecting the worst, I actually had quite a sigh of relief. I think, well, as always, a tremendous amount of work goes into these updates. So I thank staff for that. So I see that the 2021 is down 6%, 2022 up 3%, and the next year stays the same, and the overall is the same. So I think this is pretty good news. We've leveled that out. We certainly less of a hit next year, which is a year where many people may be struggling to recover. Just wanted to ask regarding the land ambulance, is that likely to raise these issues? I'm trying to recall where we were with that, if that was included, those asks that were substantial back then when we discussed that, those are included in this or not?
Ms. Barbon.
So through the chair, so in 2020, when the budget was provided, and we did receive a last minute introduction to the budget, I believe it was on the last day of deliberations, where the land ambulance was able to provide us an estimate of what the budget was going to be for inclusion as part of the 2020. So that was a 15.2 or 3% increase that was included as part of 2020. And that was confirmed with what the county ended up passing for 2020. So based on that increase, because we did not have any information for other increases going forward, we put forward an estimate of the same percentage increase as part of the multi-year budget for 2021 at that time. So the same increase to the extent in 2021 has been included as was included in and approved as part of the 2020 budget. So until we receive further information from the county to confirm the land ambulance costs, that's the best estimate that we have at this point in time. Whether it'll be higher or lower, we will need the county to confirm what the city's share will be.
Any other questions, Councillor Van Holst?
No more technical questions. Thank you.
Thanks. I have no one else on the list, so if you want to get on, this is your last chance. Great, okay. Seeing none, then we have a motion moved and seconded. So given there's no more discussion, I will call the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, I think you said no technical questions. I did want to make a comment, if that's fine.
Well, this is just the tabling of the budget. We've had no public consultation, and it's the start of the process. If you're very compelled to, I would keep it very brief, but it really should be technical questions on the budget at this point.
Okay, well, the statement I wanted to make is I noticed it was on page 15. We noted that that council had passed the request to staff to create a business case for the film industry. And I just wanted to let council know that the community is developing quite a detailed film industry strategy, like the one you will see for Toronto, and they'll present that at the same time. So council will be able to make that decision with quite a bit more information, and I hope more confidence.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Just really quickly, Mr. Chair. So this motion is just to receive and table, and I've declared the conflicts that I have, but since we're doing this, it allows that next step. I don't think anything needs to be separated. I just wanted to identify those.
That's correct, Councillor. It is basically referring the documentation to the process and receiving the presentation today. Okay. All right, seeing no other speakers, we will open this for voting.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
And at exactly 6:30, I'll hand the chair back to the mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morgan. I appreciate that, and colleagues and staff for their contributions. I indicated that at 6:30, which it is right now, that we would look to take a break as we have a few more items on the agenda, some in the public and then some in the confidential domain. So with support of council, I would direct that we recess and return at 7 o'clock sharp, and I'd look for a motion to proceed. Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, let's call that question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, meeting is recessed till 7 p.m. Thank you. Colleagues, just to light up, please. We'll see who's here. I know we're in public in just a moment, but Councillor Hillier, I was waiting for those crickets to start chirping again a little earlier. Thanks, colleagues. I'll now we'll resume back in public session. I'll turn your attention to item 4.2, which was a request for delegation status by the co-chairs of the LCCEWA, and they have specifically asked to be referred to the December 7th SPPC meeting. So our choices are to approve the delegation, deny it, or refer it to a future meeting. So I'm at the pleasure of colleagues, what you wish to do. And clerk, did I give that the appropriate background? I'm getting a nod. Councillor Squire.
I would move to refer it to the meeting requested.
Do you have a seconder for that?
I think Councillor Morgan was really keen to second that. Were you not?
He might be, but I just saw Councillor Lewis's hand first. Thank you very much.
Well, whoever.
Any comments or questions? Then we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 13-0.
Thank you, colleagues. There's a second part of that, which is in your added items, a report to the community. And I'm looking for a motion to receive this report. As you know, it would be related to the prior approval that we've just done as well. Is there a mover? Councillor Kayabag, is there a seconder? Councillor Turner, thank you. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Councillor Salih votes manually yay.
Councillor Cassidy votes yay as well.
Councillor Lewis. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, under 4.3, we have consideration of appointment to the Audit Committee, which requires one council member. You'll be pleased to know we did receive one submission from Deputy Mayor Helmer. So I'll look for, are there any other individuals interested in standing on that committee? One to be elected. Councillor Van Holst, are you?
Thank you, Worship. I would be pleased to move Deputy Mayor as a member of the Audit Committee. He's done a wonderful job. In the last 6 years, I've shared those chairs with him and would love to see him continue.
And I have a seconder in Councillor Hillier. Comments or questions? Councillor Helmer, you do not get to say anything. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's carried 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. We now have a resignation from the Elgin Area Primary Water Supply System Joint Board of Management. It's an alternate position, and you'll see on page 216 a note from Councillor Lewis indicating his resignation. We would look for a motion to accept the same. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Any comments? Then we will call the question.
We've had a little technical glitch. I'm going to reopen that vote, please.
That was me, sorry.
Yeah, to the members, if you hit, if you refresh your screen, you should see the vote. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
I'll remind colleagues before we move to 4.5 that if a colleague is interested in sitting on the Elgin Area Primary Water Supply System Joint Board of Management, if you could make your intentions known through the clerk, please. Colleagues, 4.5, on page 217, you will see a list of appointments to the Old East Village Business Improvement Area, and I'm looking for a mover for these appointments. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Comments or questions? Then we'll call the question.
Councillor Van Meerbergen? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you. Colleagues, under 4.6, Diversity, Race Relations, and Inclusivity Award nominations, I'll bring your attention to the motion at hand. I will share with you that, that no nominations were submitted for the 2020 awards. Therefore, I would like to have a motion to accept that motion, please. As soon as it comes up. Councillor Kaibaga, you have a question? Or do you make a motion? Go ahead, Councillor Kaibaga. Please go ahead. We can hold off on the motion.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to ask a question on the no submission, because I think there was a submission that was made on under this clause, and it's in our agenda.
Yeah, I think there's, I'll let the clerk respond, but I think there's two issues. One is the mayor's honors list, and then these very specific awards. So, but does the clerk have anything to add to that?
No, you've captured it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? So I'll look for a motion to accept that report. Sorry, Councillor Hillier did move. I need someone to move this, please. I'll turn your attention to the item at hand. Do you want to read that, please, and then we'll work from there, please.
Through the chair, the proposed motion is that it be noted that no nominations were submitted for the 2020 Diversity, Race Relations, and Inclusivity Awards.
This is, we're doing some cleaning up on this. We have to either accept or not accept, as the case may be, nominations as they occur. Councillor Kaibaga, you had a comment? Or would you like to move the motion? Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis, any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call the question, please. Oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. First, I'd like to know exactly what the motion is. And second, in the case where we don't have any nominations, I know that usually these awards are announced around December 10th. But is there an opportunity to extend the deadline, to re-advertise it? There's lots of people out there doing great work on diversity and race relations and inclusivity. And I just wonder if, potentially awarding it later might be better than not awarding it at all.
I'll ask the clerk to respond.
Through the chair, certainly that would be the prerogative of the committee. At this time, we do not have any. Processing nominations in time through the committee process for the December 10th council meeting could be a challenge, but those acknowledgements could be done at any time, including perhaps when the Mayor's New Year's Honors List nominees are announced.
Deputy Mayor, any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, that would be my preference, would be to just leave the awards open until sometime in December, and then see if there's applications or nominations for that award, and then we can award it later. I know we're trying to key in around the 10th of December, and that would be ideal, but I'd rather have it awarded in January than not award it at all.
I've asked in the spirit of that, Deputy Mayor, I've asked the clerk to consider wording to keep that open, and if that is supported by the mover and seconder, let's look at that wording. And Councillor Kaibaga, you had a comment on that while the clerk is doing some rewording of this. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make, I support the comments that Councillor Helmer is making. I do agree that it was a little bit, there's no communication on it, and it was sort of last minute through, to the community. So it would be great if we kept it open a little longer to give the opportunity to people to nominate someone.
Well, I thank you. And just as a point of clarification, colleagues, this is not a question of that it's not known and that it's not been promoted. I'll ask the clerk to respond how that's done, just so there's clarity around that. And there may be some confusion because of the mayor's honors list, but I will tell you that that this is a regular annual award, and we have had nominees throughout. But clerk, maybe I could just ask you to just share with the group what kind of promotion and that this particular award has had in the past. That would be helpful, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, we brought forward a report in the October meeting cycle regarding the awards and the COVID potential impacts for that. At that time, the direction was to proceed with the awards, and publication about that was done in earnest at that time through our corporate communications. Nominations for both awards have been open all year and been accessible on the city website.
Thank you very much for that. We'll look to the wording of that, rewording of that motion. Just let us know when you're ready, Clerk.
Through the chair, the wording that I have at this point for the consideration of the mover and seconder and ultimately the committee is that it be noted that no nominations were submitted for the 2020 Diversity, Race Relations and Inclusivity Awards. It being noted that nominations will remain open for receipt of nominations with a potential announcement at a later meeting date.
Does that suit the mover, Councillor Kayabага? You're comfortable with that?
Absolutely, and thank you for clarifying that. I think perhaps it wasn't noted by the community because we're in the middle of a pandemic, so thanks for being flexible to change this.
And the seconder is in agreement as well. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Cassidy, a brief comment?
Yes, Your Worship, I have a question to the clerks, given that, so I believe this, normally the Diversity, Inclusivity, and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee, they usually play a prominent role in this award. Am I correct in that? And secondly, given that our advisory committees have not been meeting, and there is some uncertainty around the advisory committees because of the ongoing review, have those things played a part in the fact that, in your opinion, do you think that the pandemic and the lack of meetings has played a part in this lack of a nomination coming forward?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll let the clerk respond to that in a moment, but first I'll come back to the comment that was made earlier by the clerk that this has been well promoted broadly throughout the community and open through the year, but I will ask the clerk to respond to the specific question, please.
Through the chair, that was the nature of the report, the staff report that was brought forward, that we needed to, if council wanted to proceed with having the awards in this year, we needed to redirect how we managed those because the committees were not meeting except for legislatively required matters.
Good with that, Councillor Cassidy?
I'll take that as a yes to my question.
Take it as you will then. But I want to come back to the point that I think that the clerk's made it fairly clear that nominations were open through the year. The clerk, you have another comment, please.
Through Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to clarify the nominations don't come only from the accessibility or from the advisory committee. They come from the community as well. Yes, COVID has made it difficult, but the nominations have been open and we would have accepted any that came in.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for the clerk? Or seeing none, we'll call the question. Sorry, Councillor Hopkins, you have a question. I apologize. Did I miss you?
Not relating to what we just passed, but I do have a follow-up question to 4.2 before we move on.
The vote is still open, and 4.2 has been dealt with. But so if it's not relating to this vote here, then if you don't mind, we'll open this vote, and then if you have a comment, I'll come back to you, please.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I do have a question, and it's for clarification to 4.2. I'm just trying to understand that the strategic progress report and delegation request is being moved to a future SPPC meeting. just want to confirm that because I think I missed what we were doing there.
There was, thank you for that. The specific request was that it be referred to the December 7th SPPC meeting. And clerk, you have a comment you want to add?
Thank you. Through the chair, what's referred to the December meeting is the delegation. The report has been received.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you for that. I missed an opportunity to make a few comments, so I will be following up later on.
Thank you. You'll have the opportunity to counsel for sure, Councillor Hopkins. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. We now have on the agenda, we now have 5.1 under deferred matters, additional business. It is the second report of the Governance Working Group from its meeting held on November 10th. I will turn this over to Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. So the Governance Working Group, I have the full report before you. We had a number of guests at the meeting. We had a good discussion, but we ended up coming to some consensus on some things and passing things unanimously. I'd be happy to separate anything out if colleagues would like, but otherwise I'll put the whole report on the table.
Thank you. Does anyone wish any item dealt with separately? Seeing none, any comments or questions with respect to the content of the report? Okay. I'll look for a seconder for that. Sorry, Deputy Mayor, before we do that, I need a seconder for this report. Councillor Lewis, thank you. Deputy Mayor Helmer, you had a comment.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing a future report come back. I know that at various points along this process, I have been often one to say, let's make sure we actually finish the advisory committee review. But I do think as the committee, the working group is recommending here, going back to the advisory committees to get their input on what has been proposed is a very important step. And as much as I'd like to move quickly, I also want to move together with the advisory committees and get their feedback on what has been proposed. I think they know very well sort of what the strengths and weaknesses are of the existing advisory committees. And I think one of the things we need their advice on is how we set them up and how they can perform at their best. It's not the only place we need to get advice on this front, but I think it's really important. And I'm not so sure about some of these changes that have been proposed. I think some of them are promising and some of them I'm a little skeptical about, but I like the idea of going back to get feedback. And I think over the course of the many years that the advisory committee review has been underway, it's important to keep getting back in touch with the committees to get their, because the membership changes, they've got different opinions over time as they get more experience. And so I'm looking forward to a kind of fulsome, meaningful consultation with them, and then we can deal with the future report. I want to thank the working group for making that recommendation.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on the list. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I just want to thank Deputy Mayor Helmer for pointing that out. And it's probably worth just mentioning a moment about where we are in the process. The report was received by the committee. The committee made a number of comments. This is an ongoing dialogue and discussion. As you can see, we've directed some components into the next iteration of the report, but for clarity, the next iteration of the report will go to the advisory committees before it comes back to governance working groups. So we will be able to have their thoughts and feedback on the next steps before the working group considers anything further. So Deputy Mayor Helmer is exactly right. That is a key step in the process that the committee felt was important. And that's the order of operations and how we'll proceed with SPPC and council approval, of course.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. I see no other speakers. We'll call the vote.
Councillor Helmer, Councillor Van Meerbergen. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thanks very much, colleagues. We have two items in confidential session to be discussed, and will require a motion. Before we do, though, for the benefit of the public, I would like to ask the clerk just to explain why we're going into confidential session, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, the confidential session will be for two matters as are outlined on the committee agenda. One being personal matters about identifiable individuals having with respect to the 2021 Mayor's New Year's Honors List. And the second is a matter pertaining to personal matters about identifiable individuals, labor relations, or employee negotiations, including communications necessary for that purpose, and advice and recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, including communications necessary for that purpose, and for the purpose of providing instructions and direction to officers and employees of the corporation.
Thank you. I look for a motion to move into closed session, please. Moved by Councillor Van Meerbergen, second by Councillor Hopkins. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
And colleagues, we'll just need a couple of minutes to move into confidential session and move some of the equipment around. Thank you.